Book 2, Chapter 10 of Michael Strogoff, Courier of the Tsar. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Michael Strogoff by Jules Verne. Book 2, Chapter 10. Baikal and Angara. Lake Baikal is situated 1,700 feet above the level of the sea. Its length is about 600 miles, its breadth 70. Its depth is not known. Madame de Bourboulon states that, according to the boatmen, it likes to be spoken of as Madam Sea. If it is called Sir Lake, it immediately lashes itself into fury. However, it is reported and believed by the Siberians that a Russian is never drowned in it. This immense basin of fresh water, fed by more than 300 rivers, is surrounded by magnificent volcanic mountains. It has no other outlet than the Angara, which after passing Irkutsk throws itself into the Yenisei, a little above the town of Yeniseisk. As to the mountains which encase it, they form a branch of the Tunguzes, and are derived from the vast system of the Altai. In this territory, subject to peculiar climatical conditions, the autumn appears to be absorbed in the precocious winter. It was now the beginning of October. The sun set at 5 o'clock in the evening, and during the long nights the temperature fell to zero. The first snows, which would last till summer, already whitened the summits of the neighboring hills. During the Siberian winter this inland sea is frozen over to a thickness of several feet, and is crossed by the sleighs of caravans. Either because there are people who are so wanting in politeness as to call it Sir Lake, or for some more meteorological reason, Lake Baikal is subject to violent tempests. Its waves, short like those of all inland seas, are much feared by the rafts, prams, and steamboats, which furrow it during the summer. It was the southwest point of the lake which Michael had now reached, carrying Nadia, whose whole life, so to speak, was concentrated in her eyes. But what could these two expect in this wild region, if it was not to die of exhaustion and famine? And yet, what remained of the long journey of 4,000 miles for the Czar's courier to reach his end? Nothing but 40 miles on the shore of the lake up to the mouth of the Angara, and 60 miles from the mouth of the Angara to Irkutsk, in all 100 miles, or 3 days' journey for a strong man, even on foot. Could Michael Strogoff still be that man? Heaven, no doubt, did not wish to put him to this trial. The fatality which had hitherto pursued his steps seemed for a time to spare him. This end of the Baikal, this part of the steppe which he believed to be a desert, which it usually is, was not so now. About 50 people were collected at the angle formed by the end of the lake. Nadia immediately caught sight of this group, when Michael, carrying her in his arms, issued from the mountain pass. The girl feared for a moment that it was a Tartar detachment, sent to beat the shores of the Baikal, in which case flight would have been impossible to them both. But Nadia was soon reassured. "Russians!" she exclaimed, and with this last effort, her eyes closed and her head fell on Michael's breast. But they had been seen, and some of these Russians, running to them, led the blind man and the girl to a little point at which was moored a raft. The raft was just going to start. These Russians were fugitives of different conditions, whom the same interest had united at Lake Baikal. Driven back by the Tartar scouts, they hoped to obtain a refuge at Irkutsk, but not being able to get there by land, the invaders having occupied both banks of the Angara, they hoped to reach it by descending the river which flows through the town. Their plan made Michael's heart leap. A last chance was before him, but he had strength to conceal this, wishing to keep his incognito more strictly than ever. The fugitives' plan was very simple. A current in the lake runs along by the upper bank to the mouth of the Angara. This current they hoped to utilize, and with its assistance to reach the outlet of Lake Baikal. From this point to Irkutsk, the rapid waters of the river would bear them along at a rate of 8 miles an hour. In a day and a half they might hope to be in sight of the town. No kind of boat was to be found. They had been obliged to make one. A raft, or rather a float of wood, similar to those which are usually drifted down Siberian rivers, was constructed. A forest of firs, growing on the bank, had supplied the necessary materials. The trunks, fastened together with osiers, made a platform on which 100 people could have easily found room. On board this raft Michael and Nadia were taken. The girl had returned to herself, some food was given to her as well as to her companion. Then, lying on a bed of leaves, she soon fell into a deep sleep. To those who questioned him, Michael Strogoff said nothing of what had taken place at Tomsk. He gave himself out as an inhabitant of Krasnoyarsk, who had not been able to get to Irkutsk before the Emir's troops arrived on the left bank of the Dinka, and he added that, very probably, the bulk of the Tartar forces had taken up a position before the Siberian capital. There was not a moment to be lost; besides, the cold was becoming more and more severe. During the night the temperature fell below zero, ice was already forming on the surface of the Baikal. Although the raft managed to pass easily over the lake, it might not be so easy between the banks of the Angara, should pieces of ice be found to block up its course. At 8 in the evening the moorings were cast off, and the raft drifted in the current along the shore. It was steered by means of long poles, under the management of several muscular moujiks. An old Baikal boatman took command of the raft. He was a man of 65, browned by the sun and lake breezes. A thick white beard flowed over his chest, a fur cap covered his head, his aspect was grave and austere. His large greatcoat, fastened in at the waist, reached down to his heels. This taciturn old fellow was seated in the stern, and issued his commands by gestures. Besides, the chief work consisted in keeping the raft in the current, which ran along the shore, without drifting out into the open. It has been already said that Russians of all conditions had found a place on the raft. Indeed, to the poor moujiks, the women, old men, and children, were joined 2 or 3 pilgrims, surprised on their journey by the invasion, a few monks and a priest. The pilgrims carried a staff, a gourd hung at the belt, and they chanted psalms in a plaintive voice. One came from the Ukraine, another from the Yellow Sea, and a third from the Finland provinces. This last, who was an aged man, carried at his waist a little padlocked collecting box, as if it had been hung at a church door. Of all that he collected during his long and fatiguing pilgrimage, nothing was for himself. He did not even possess the key of the box, which would only be opened on his return. The monks came from the north of the empire. 3 months before they had left the town of Archangel. They had visited the sacred islands near the coast of Karelia, the convent of Solovesk, the convent of Troitsa, those of St. Antony and St. Theodosia, at Kiev, that of Kazan, as well as the church of the Old Believers, and they were now on their way to Irkutsk, wearing the robe, the cowl, and the clothes of serge. As to the Papa, or priest, he was a plain village pastor, one of the 600,000 popular pastors which the Russian Empire contains. He was clothed as miserably as the moujiks, not being above them in social position, in fact laboring like a peasant on his plot of ground, baptizing, marrying, burying. He had been able to protect his wife and children from the brutality of the Tartars by sending them away into the northern provinces. He himself had stayed in his parish up to the last moment, then he was obliged to fly, and the Irkutsk road being stopped, had come to Lake Baikal. These priests, grouped in the forward part of the raft, prayed at regular intervals, raising their voices in the silent night, and at the end of each sentence of their prayer, the Slava Bogu, glory to God, issued from their lips. No incident took place during the night. Nadia remained in a sort of stupor, and Michael watched beside her. Sleep only overtook him at long intervals, and even then his brain did not rest. At break of day the raft, delayed by a strong breeze, which counteracted the course of the current, was still 40 versts from the mouth of the Angara. It seemed probable that the fugitives could not reach it before 3 or 4 o'clock in the evening. This did not trouble them, on the contrary, for they would then descend the river during the night, and the darkness would also favor their entrance into Irkutsk. The only anxiety exhibited at times by the old boatman was concerning the formation of ice on the surface of the water. The night had been excessively cold. Pieces of ice could be seen drifting towards the west. Nothing was to be dreaded from these, since they could not drift into the Angara, having already passed the mouth, but pieces from the eastern end of the lake might be drawn by the current between the banks of the river. This would cause difficulty, possibly delay, and perhaps even an insurmountable obstacle which would stop the raft. Michael therefore took immense interest in ascertaining what was the